This happened a few years ago during my second year in high school. One thing I should mention is that I attended a public high school known as one of the largest in the country with a high graduation rate. Each of the 4 grades had over 1,000 students, and the teaching staff might also be around 1,000 people. So there were about 5,000 people in the building when this incident occurred. As I suspected, like most other lockdowns, the day was quite normal. I had all my morning classes as usual, then lunch, and started the second half of my day. I was in physics class at the time, and we were doing a project outside. I asked if I could quickly go in to use the bathroom, and my teacher said yes. The bathroom was right near the entrance, so I ran in and did my business. As I was washing my hands, a tall old man in a gray hoodie entered. He looked at me without saying anything, and went into the farthest stall. I quickly dried my hands and left. I felt weird because the man was dressed like that, as someone his age should be a teacher or staff. I didn't know him at all, but the school was so big, and I only knew about a quarter of the staff, so it wasn't too important to me. I went back outside, and after another 15 minutes of work, my teacher started bringing us back inside. Our school had a specific area where classes were allowed to exit outside, and the one we visited was quite far from our classroom, about a 4-minute walk. As the entire class was inside and starting to head to the room, the announcement came suddenly over the intercom that the entire facility was now in lockdown. We all looked at the same confused teacher, but soon he began to lead us back to the room while remaining silent. Halfway there, another teacher looked down the hallway and offered to bring us into their classroom because it was spacious and had plenty of room. We all hurriedly entered and sat against the wall while the 2 teachers talked to each other about what was happening. As I sat there, I thought about the man I saw in the bathroom and wondered if he was the cause of this lockdown. I shuddered just thinking about how close I was to him. We sat quietly for only a few minutes before we heard someone tapping lightly on the window outside. Both teachers signaled for us to stay quiet as the taps continued. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway, approaching our classroom door. There was a pause. Then a man yelled, "It's okay. I know there's a lot of you in there. Open the door for me." I started to panic a little, and so did most of the class. The man outside might be able to hear the loud crying coming from the room now. The man outside the door began to get more aggressive, yelling and cursing at us while slamming the door. It sounded like he had a hammer or something, which made us even more afraid. This went on for a full minute before the man outside the window shouted for him to stop and said they needed to leave immediately. Police sirens were heard from the front of the school, but the man at the door continued slamming for another 30 seconds before giving up, and we could hear him running back down the hallway. The police caught him as he exited the building, but they never found the second man. When they released the image of the man, I didn't recognize him, so I'm still not sure who the man in the bathroom was, but I always assumed that he was the second man outside the window who was never caught. The common theory for the crime was that they were trying to break into the science classrooms to steal expensive equipment, but I guess that was never confirmed, so it remains a mystery. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I know most people never experience lockdown situations, and if they do, it usually happens at school. But it actually happened to me while I was working in retail one night. I used to work in Des Plaines, which is a suburb located north of Chicago. It was a pretty ordinary day at work to start, and I mostly worked the closing shift because of school, so I usually got off around 10 p.m. Around 4 o'clock, my coworkers started showing news of the riots happening in the city. This was caused by certain police incidents happening at the time. It was quite intense, as the rioters entered stores and vandalized everything, even assaulting employees. I honestly wasn't sure why they were vandalizing the stores, but it was really crazy. By 6 o'clock, the riots and protests escalated, with thousands of people participating and hundreds of stores being destroyed and looted. There were even talks of the unrest spreading to the suburbs of Chicago, including some nearby suburban areas. I definitely stayed vigilant and watched the customers to make sure I was prepared for any possibility. 2 more hours passed, and at this point, it seemed like the whole city was on fire, and some of my coworkers even went home early because they were so nervous. My manager working the night shift was very understanding, and we didn't have many customers coming in either, so he didn't mind them leaving early. I stayed behind because I wasn't too worried and knew I wouldn't get paid unless I stayed. Not long after, I realized that was a mistake. I was stocking products in the aisle on the left side of the store, opposite the main entrance, when I heard some shouting outside. I went to the front of the aisle, where I could see out the window towards the front of the store, and I could see some people running around, but the light from inside made it difficult to see what was happening outside through the window. I started heading towards the store entrance when the intercom came on, and I could hear my manager announcing that the store was now in lockdown and everyone needed to immediately go to the back. Against better judgment, my curiosity led me a little further so I could see out the front door, which at the time I didn't realize had been securely locked. I saw 10 to 15 people running along the windows, banging on the glass, and trying to kick and damage the open doors. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my life. I immediately started running to the back of the store, seeing other employees and customers doing the same. When I got to the back, I saw my manager guiding people into the large walk-in cooler where we kept deli meats and products. For those who've never worked in a grocery store or another place with a walk-in cooler, this room is basically a large refrigerated cupboard with a big iron door and usually some plastic flaps on it as well. Anyway, I went in. I was probably one of the last people to get in because a few seconds later my manager closed the door and locked it from the inside. I felt pretty safe in there because I knew realistically no one could get in without heavy equipment. But what scared me was how long I would be in there. What if a group of people were waiting outside the door? I'd say there were around 30 to 40 people in there with me, and many of them were really panicking, asking us if the door would hold. My manager tried to reassure them a little, but that's when we started hearing noises from inside the store. Things breaking, falling, shouting, and screaming. I have to admit, hearing those sounds firsthand was truly terrifying. I was trembling as we could hear the sounds getting clearer as they approached the back of the store. Soon, their footsteps could be heard outside the room, and then a few seconds of silence before the door shook as someone tried to open it. I guess they soon realized that the door was locked from the inside, and they began shouting and pounding on it, yelling at us to open the door. We all tried to remain as quiet as possible, but some customers started crying as we could hear more people outside joining in shouting and pounding. One of them even shouted, "This is the police! Open up!" trying to trick us, or make us a laughingstock or something. This went on for about 15 minutes with continuous banging and shouting before it started to slow down. Over the next 30 minutes, it gradually became quieter as most of them shifted their attention elsewhere. Occasionally, someone would come and knock on the door a few times and then leave. It took almost an hour for the police to clear the building and let us out safely. When we got out, the whole store had been vandalized, shelves overturned, and products scattered all over the floor. It was insane seeing the store like that. Anyway, as far as I know, the violence mostly cleared up overnight in the suburbs, but I think it continued in Chicago for a few days. It was definitely the most intense situation I've ever experienced, and I'm glad everyone in the store was able to get out without injury. At that time, I was 13 years old and in middle school. Our school was quite small, and nothing had ever happened. So I had never been in a dangerous situation at school before that day. It was the beginning of the day, and I had just arrived in my second period class, which for me was English class. The class proceeded as usual with lectures and reading examples. It was one of my favorite classes because I usually felt bored. However, the class fell silent as we were supposed to read a sample paper. Suddenly, the speaker made a loud beep sound, and the lights turned off. "We are now in lockdown mode. This is not a drill," the speaker blared. Everyone in the class began to look at each other, confused and a little nervous. As I said, I never thought that something would ever happen here. So it was really surprising and confusing to hear that we were in lockdown mode, making me wonder what was actually happening. After a few seconds, my teacher started giving orders, telling us all to line up against the wall next to the door. Then she hurriedly locked the door and turned off all the lights, but I guess the power went out before she could do it herself. Some girls in the class started crying a bit, which I understood because it was quite a stressful and thrilling situation. I'd say almost 10 minutes passed without any sound or anything, when suddenly footsteps could be heard running through the hallway outside our class. As they reached our class, they abruptly stopped. I could feel the entire room holding its breath as we waited, listening anxiously. Then a boy started knocking on the door, pleading to be let into the classroom. I was honestly scared because I couldn't tell how old the boy's voice sounded, and I looked towards my teacher, who looked just as frightened as all of us. She stood up and moved towards the door slowly, looking through the window, then quickly opened the door and let the boy in. I recognized him from just seeing him walking in the hallway before, but we never had a class together. My teacher asked if he was okay, and then told him to sit along the wall with the rest of us. Once we all got situated again, I leaned forward and whispered to him, asking what happened. He said he was in the bathroom during the lockdown, and waited for a while before a middle-aged man came in and started knocking on all the stall doors. It seemed like when the man knocked on his stall door, he crawled under the stall side and ran to escape. Luckily, the man only chased him down the small hallway before stopping. My body suddenly felt cold, as if I had just realized that this was really happening, and we were in real danger from a crazy man. Not even a minute later, clear footsteps were heard approaching our classroom door. Some other kids in the room held their mouths, trying to muffle their cries as a single knock on the door echoed through the room. A few seconds later, 2 or 3 more sets of footsteps walked towards the door, and the group started talking to each other. It was too faint to hear what they were saying, but knowing that it was a group of dangerous men made my stomach drop. I looked towards my teacher, who was trying to reassure one of the girls, but even she looked scared. Then one of the men outside shouted, and all their footsteps ran away. I guess the police finally showed up. I could feel the relief from the entire class. We stayed there for another 20 minutes before everything finally cleared up, and then the situation ended. It seemed like a group of suspicious men entered, demanding one of their kids to be pulled out of class. Clearly, none of them were actually parents of any of the kids, so the whole thing escalated, and they forced their way into the building. That's about all we were told, but it was definitely a situation I'll remember for a lifetime.